Welcome. Hello. Happy Friday. It is buenas tardes. For me, it is Friday afternoon. It might be Friday morning where you are. It might even be Friday evening. Whichever one it happens to be. Yay! We had some
Yay.
minor technical difficulties and it looks like we're ready to go. So if you normally are here on Wednesday nights, you're like, what's going on? It's a Friday afternoon and who are all of these people? If you are new, welcome. It might be helpful if I do this. Welcome to my channel. My name is Adelia Borishade, although most people know me as Picky Girl Travels the World. I have been living abroad almost 7 years. I call Mexico City home. My channel is all about my life in Mexico City and the work I do, helping Black women become financially confident so that they can live the life of their dreams. If you're into any of those topics, travel, living abroad, managing your money, you are in the right place. It is going to be an absolute must for you to subscribe to the channel because there's a lot of good information around here. And you should turn on notifications because I usually go live once a week, sometimes more than once. And you want to be the first to know. So, welcome, everybody. Today we're doing a panel, and these ladies have been so gracious as to when I show up in their inbox, they're like, okay, Adelia, whatever. Uh, um, we have had multiple panel conversations on this channel, and I forget what triggered this idea in my head, but I guess technically I kind of fit in this group, but also not. I am the child of an immigrant, but that immigrant didn't stick around in my life, so we don't really count him. But um, I think as a Black American living outside the US, and I bring with me that uniquely Black American experience, and I have other Black friends who live abroad, but who may not have a specific American experience. I'm very cognizant of the fact that our experiences are all different. And I can't quite remember what made it click in my head. And I wondered about the experience of folks who have chosen to move abroad after their parents or either migrated to another country and raised them there, or they migrated as children. And so that's when I put the call out and invited these ladies to come and join us today. So let me pull up my notes, which are not on my computer, but on my phone for some reason. And we will get things started. And whoever wants to go first can go first. I would like you to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us where your parents or you moved from to initially, and then where you live now. Does that make sense? Okay. Dawn, you want to go
Yeah,
first?
I'll start. My name is Dawn, and let me see if I remember because my memory. My name is Dawn Belial, and my parents came to the U.S. from Belize. The story is I was in the tummy, but I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I now live in France, the south of France.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
Zoe?
I'll go.
Okay. Wiada?
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Wiata Thomas, and my family is from Liberia, and moved to the States. I was born in New York, in Manhattan, and grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I now live in Senegal, Dakar, Senegal, West Africa.
Okay.
I'm the token non-American on the call. As you can tell, I'm trying to drop the accent, but it's not working. My grandparents left Grenada in the West Indies in the 1950s, My parents grew up in London as kids, and 2 years ago, I made the journey to Grenada in the West Indies, where I still am now.
Okay. And Carla.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carla Fraser. And so my parents moved from Jamaica to the US. I then moved and was born in the US. I then moved from the US to Jamaica and lived there, and then moved back to the US. And now I have lived around the world a few times, but currently in the Dominican Republic.
Okay. All right. So I tried my best to get us some variety, although I will tell y'all, in trying to think of who to ask, there definitely seems to be a lot of folks from the Caribbean who have either moved to the US or the UK, and then their kids turned around and said, okay, this is not for me, I'm moving somewhere else. I'm sure there is a very interesting reason behind that. And I've got a few theories of my own. Okay. I am curious as to what it was like growing up as the child of immigrants, the grandchildren of immigrants, where you lived. Were you welcomed? Were you not welcome? Particularly like in the US, we like to tell ourselves that it's this great big melting pot and we're a country of immigrants. I am curious as to what your experience was growing up.
I'll start. I can go. Sorry, Dawn, do you want to
No, go.
So I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Was born in New York, but raised in Knoxville. And we were the only African family in Knoxville. Knoxville is, of course, in the South. And we were like the go-to African family for anything related to Africa growing up. So it didn't matter where it happened on the continent. They came and interviewed my family. We were often in the newspapers, or, just they would take pictures of us just because we were always wearing, African clothing. We were always somewhere dancing, doing something. And so our family was just that family. So growing up, it was interesting because when I came home, it was little Liberia. Like I was definitely no longer in America, and at home was fully immersed in our culture. And then going to school, I was in the South, in Knoxville, Tennessee, in the South. I mainly went to mostly white schools. There were maybe like 2 or 3 Black kids. And so it was very jarring. It was very jarring for me growing up. Like I felt like I didn't belong anywhere, because going home, of course, like I love my culture, but also it's like I'm an American kid. And so it was hard explaining to my parents, and I'm sure a lot of immigrant, kids have the same experience. But like it was hard explaining to my parents like the things I was going through in school, or it's just like did not relate, did not at all, have any context of that. And then going to school and being completely different there as well. Like I'm not one of y'all either. So I always felt very, very different and very, very outcasted in general. So that's my story.
I'm going to add a UK perspective. So I guess maybe some folks think of the UK as a melting pot. You see Notting Hill Carnival, like a celebration of diversity. The reality of that is something else. A lot of the statistics you see for deaths in maternal health, incarceration of Black men, outcomes in education, employment, they're very similar, depressingly similar. For Black folks in the UK as they are in the US, but the perception kind of allows it more difficult to speak out against the nonsense that happens in the UK. But in terms of growing up, I think for me it was slightly different because my parents moved, they were sent when they were maybe 8 or 9 years old. So they, in some ways, their way of coping with living in England was a lot about assimilation, sort of getting your head down, fitting into the system and just doing what was expected of you, and trying to kind of, I always used to say this annoying thing, fly the flag. Like I had to fly the flag for like all Black people, which felt like slightly unfair. So my experience of growing up as the grandchildren of immigrants, or I guess the child of immigrants, was much more about assimilation. Um, we grew up in the suburbs, so there weren't really that many West Indian families around us. Maybe at church. Church would be like the only time once a week where I was fully surrounded by Black folks, West Indian folks. But nursery school was all white, a second primary school all white, work all white. So yeah, in a way, I didn't really grow up loving being West Indian or Caribbean. It was, yeah, it just didn't feel particularly cool, and I don't think I embraced my culture that much. If anyone had said, like, 30 years down the line, you'll be living in Grenada, I would have cried. I would have said, no, that's not possible. I don't particularly enjoy the island. So it's just interesting how you grow and you learn and you begin to make sense of your identity and what's important and what's not. So it's definitely been a journey.
I'm going to remember to come back to the assimilation comment. Okay. Dawn?
I had a different experience. Like I said, apparently my mom was pregnant with me when she came over. My dad was already here. And my mom was like, if you don't come back and get me, you're going to be back here with me because I'm calling immigration. So we went and got my mom, came back, and I was born in Brooklyn. And yes, it's true as far as New York, the melting pot. So it seems like the trek for most Caribbean people leaving an island is either when they come to the States, they're either going to go to New York, California, or Florida. And most of the time people go to New York first and then they figure out where afterwards. So for me, I didn't feel any kind of way. Thinking about it now, even at a young age, I was able to separate it. I totally grew up in my Belizean culture, totally at home with the accent, the food, everything, totally immersed in it. And when I went to school, I was, me, the American. And when I moved to Florida, same thing, because Florida is a melting pot of different Caribbean and Latin cultures. So for me, it was a little different because I didn't find any difficulty in it. I will say when I did move to the South, when I was in New York, I didn't have anybody asking me, well, what are you? That was what it was. That was the question. What are you? Not, what race you are, but what are you? I had no problems, and I moved to Florida when I was 12. So I was in New York until I was 12. And it wasn't until I went down to the South was where that started to become an issue when I first got down there. But other than that, because in both of those places, there was such a big mix of Caribbean and Spanish communities, I didn't find that much of it wasn't that difficult for me.
Okay. All right. Carla?
So I'm a little bit different as well. My mom immigrated to the U.S., met my dad here, who was also from Jamaica. So my parents are both Jamaican. I was born in the U.S., but then I moved to Jamaica as a baby and lived my childhood up until I was 10, 11, somewhere in there, in Jamaica. So a lot of my childhood and a lot of my learning was very much in my Caribbean culture. And then moved back to the US. Now I traveled back and forth between Jamaica and Chicago area where my mom lived. So we lived in the suburbs of Chicago, which is where I grew up. And so I went to a very multicultural middle school when I came back, a very multicultural high school. And so I was very much in the space of I'm different, but I'm not. There was lots of Caribbeans at my school. There was a large Jewish community. There was a large Indian community. So it for me, I've always been in this multicultural space. growing up as a child, and then growing up in Jamaica was, definitely one of those places where, oh, I look like everyone. I'm good. And then from there, going to college, I went to PWI, a predominantly white institution, and for school, and then, so on and so forth. So for me, I don't necessarily know that I probably did a lot of assimilation. I know I did, because when I came from Jamaica, while I was taught the Queen's English, I spoke patois, and I had an accent, and I spent a lot of time crying in my room and practicing differently. So it's definitely a bit different. And I would say I probably was fortunate to grow up in the suburb of Chicago that I did, having the experiences in the communities that I did. And my mom was we were around a lot of other Caribbeans from Jamaica and other places.
And so to me, Carla, I remembered you telling us this before. Although you were wait, I was like, you've been an immigrant a lot. And even to the same place. So your experience is especially unique. Okay, so hearing all of y'all talk about this, a couple of things popped into my head. Okay, the idea of a melting pot is all of these different cultures come together and we meld into something new. So I think that ideology feeds into assimilation. However, there are those who would argue that we're really more like a mixed salad. Like, yeah, we're all in the same bowl, but there is no blending. Me and my cucumbers are still over here. The tomatoes are still chilling over there. So I heard what Zoe said about, like, because, your parents had spent so much time there already, assimilation was definitely more of that. I'm just curious from the other ladies, did you find the need? Because I would assume because you, as a kid, you want to be like everybody else. You don't want to be different. And I think that might push you a little bit more into the assimilation vein of things than maybe you would have otherwise. Dawn, I am curious because you grew up partially in a place like New York, where there are lots of different kinds of people and embracing their own individual cultures. Like, was there any twinge of that, or?
Honestly, for me, no. But I know that there was for some of my aunts, not specifically like my parents, but of course, my parents kind of led the way once my parents came over. Then my mom's sisters came over, and some of my cousins, they were born there and they were young and they came over. I found it, this is weird because I found it that the ones that were born there and came over, even though they may have been younger than me and they were young, they got more caught up into the assimilation aspect than I did. And I don't know if that has anything to do with because I was actually born in the US and they weren't, so they felt that they had to. But I didn't. I was able to separate it, honestly. I didn't feel like when I was at school, when I was younger, when I was in school, no one really kind of asked or knew, and we were a tight community. So, Belizeans, I mean, like at home, it was strictly the Belizean culture. When I got into high school, then people, I don't even remember how it came about, but then that's when it became a little bit more known that my background was not American. And I didn't have a problem then. It was just, for me, it was more of educating people, because a lot of people didn't know about and hadn't heard about Belize. By that time, though, I'm in Florida. So you've got a multitude of people, and they really aren't assimilating. They're doing their, if we Dominican, if we Cuban, if we're, Jamaican, if we're Trinidadian, they're like, we don't care about assimilating. Maybe the younger folks may to a certain extent, in speaking. Like for my cousins, some of my cousins did the assimilation thing where they tried very, 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 very hard to not have an accent. And even when they were home with the family and we would have family functions, they wouldn't talk with the accent. And I would flip it. I wouldn't talk with my accent outside, but when I'm with the family, I would talk, and I would actually get mad at them because I'm like, why are you trying to, why are you talking like this? So that's kind of how my situation was. I would, because my friends could hear me. And as I got in high school, I wasn't ashamed or embarrassed of it, because if my friends came to my house, they'd be like, what's your mama saying? Or I'm talking to my mom, I can flip into my accent to speak to my mom. If you're on the phone and your mom's like da da da, and you're like, hold on a second, girl, and then you're like da 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 da. Okay, I'm back now. They're like, how do you do that? So for me, I didn't, but I did see that in some of my other relatives, absolutely trying to do the assimilation thing. I did see that.
I would say that I did it from a language perspective. Culturally at home, my mom was very much about our Jamaican culture. We went out, we did things, we're around other Caribbeans. For me, it was a language thing, and it was school. And even more so than a language thing, it was not just Jamaican patois, but it was also the British English. I grew up as a child learning British English. And when I went to a US school, that was difficult. I used to cry because my papers would have so much red ink on them because I wasn't spelling words right. I wasn't doing my work in the American way. And so I learned to assimilate both language, and writing is still a challenge. But anyways, in that respect, and for the most part, it's stuck. Now, Caribbeans will tell me they can hear it, but Americans won't necessarily will.
I had a little bit of a different experience in the sense that I wasn't trying to. Well, okay, this was my experience. I grew up, like I said, I was in a very, very Liberian household, like extremely 100% Liberian household. And when I went to school, I was completely different. So kind of like what you were saying, Adelia, as a kid, like you want to be like everybody else. And when I was growing up, I went to mostly white schools. But then when I was in middle school, I went to an inner city school that was a magnet school, like for, the talented and gifted. And so it was all Black. And I was such an outcast, because not only am I like a kid of immigrants, but also I speak proper English. My mother also went to school. She went to school in England from the time she was 14. And so she was very adamant that we speak proper English, and we would get, punished if we didn't. And so I wanted so bad to be Black, like Black. You know what I'm saying? So I would go home.
I was going to say, don't tell me you weren't Black enough. Like, but that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I remember, like, I think Carla said it, like crying at home and like in my room and practicing Ebonics in the mirror, like practicing how to like nod my head in a certain way or not, like, how to be cool. Like I was really, really trying so hard. And I would beg my mom to buy me certain clothes, or like, I really, really wanted to be Black. Yeah.
I was wondering, because all of your people come from places that speak English.
Yeah.
And I wondered, or I would have thought that it would have been an easier transition than, let's say, had y'all immigrated from China or Uzbekistan or someplace where having to learn English on top of all of the other cultural stuff.
Yeah. For me, I noticed it even more in the reverse, right? So being back in Grenada, I genuinely feel, and some people tell me that I'm wrong, but I genuinely feel there's times where like it just goes downhill. Like as soon as I open my mouth and there's the accent, and it's like, why aren't you speaking like us? You're distinguishing yourself. Like you already assume you think you're better. Like it's language, but because of colonialism or whatever, there's so much imbued into like an accent. So the same language spoken by one person in different ways has totally different impacts. And I genuinely wish I could switch, but I can't. I can maybe get a bit more London and a bit more well-spoken, but those are the only two directions, like more Caribbean. Even if I'm angry, like some people when they're angry, like switch into that. It's just this. So I am considering working on it, but also it feels really inauthentic to like try and switch. But I don't know.
Be you. Be you for you. Be
Yeah.
you for you.
Until I'm in trouble, then I need to have to switch it. But yeah, I've been working on it.
One other question I was wondering about before we move on to something else. Often when, and I don't know if this is the case in the UK, they're like good immigrants and bad immigrants, at least in the US. Or like, Asians are like the ideal immigrant because they are considered to be quiet and docile and they get good grades and they do that. And then, there are those problematic immigrants who are from quote unquote less desirable countries. I'm just curious if you had to deal with any of that growing up, even as an adult before you left, like, oh, you're even being told, because I've had this happen to some people I know, like, oh, you're okay, you're a good immigrant, or like, we don't really care for your kind around here. I don't know. I'm just asking.
I haven't. First of all, not that many people even knew about Belize until just a few years ago. So it's like they don't even know what Belize is because it is a mixture. It's a mixture of Caribbean and Spanish. It's right under Mexico. My parents came in illegally. Thank God wasn't no wall there then because that's how they got here. But for me, I think because people didn't even know. They didn't know, so or they weren't familiar with it. So I never. Now I don't know if maybe my parents, may have, or my aunts or uncles, but I have never had anybody say, oh, distinguish that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never had that either.
I was just curious.
I was gonna say I have. So there is a tinge around Jamaica.
Mm-hmm. But that's the one they know. That's the island everybody kind of knows about. You think Caribbean? Jamaica.
True. And I know this from growing up as a child. If the Jamaicans in New York did something bad, then it got throughout the entire country, and then all Jamaicans were looked at in a certain way. And then I really remember that. It was the Jamaican posses, it was the Jamaican gangs, and then all of a sudden, like Chicago was all over the Jamaican, thing, or LA, or whatever it was. But whenever something bad went down with particularly Jamaican New York, that became the rest of the country. So that's the only thing that I can recall that would happen. And then you just kind of, got your head.
Okay. So you no longer live in that country that either you or your folks migrated to. And so the obvious question there is kind of when and why did you consider leaving, moving abroad, moving elsewhere?
For me, it's down to my grandparents, right? My grandparents left Grenada in the 1950s. The UK in the 1950s had this big recon effort, so they called people from the colonies to kind of do the dirty work. It's like, come get a load of money, you'll live well forever. What happened is that most people who moved kind of got plugged into the system. Their children were at school, they bought property, etc. But both sets of grandparents, my mum's side And my dad's side, they were different. They came, they worked for 20 years, and they got the hell out of there. So for me, growing up, the whole idea that the UK was so great that you stayed there, like the two kind of ancestors in my line were like, no, this place isn't it. So at the same time that my parents like assimilate, be the good immigrant, fly the flag for all Black people, and kind of just get along, the fact that I had other people who knew made it really, the idea that you had to stay in a place wasn't really on my radar. So as a kid, I knew that I wanted to live elsewhere. I studied Italian at university. My first job was working in Milan. I moved to Spain in my early 30s. So I think I always knew that I was never going to stay in the UK. Also, the UK is really small. Like, it's an island. And for many reasons, it's just really common within the culture to be elsewhere. So I think the seed was sowed really early on. Like, it's just the fact that the destination ended up being Grenada was something that happened much later on in my journey. But for me, a lot of that had to do with having children. So not wanting my kids to go through what I did in terms of feeling a really tenuous connection to Grenada. Unlike Jamaica, unlike many other places, most people don't even know where Grenada is, or they think it's a city in Spain. So for them really to have time on the island, figuring out their connections, what they liked, what they didn't like, I felt that was really important in terms of our journey as a family and then understanding their own identity as well.
That is really interesting. And I guess my pre-existing ideas or whatever are colored by living in the US and all of the US propaganda of like, this is the greatest place on earth. Everybody is trying to come here. So in my head, the thought is, well, yes, if you're going to pack up your life and move somewhere else, you're doing that like permanently. And your grandparents were like, no, we came here, we did what we meant to, and we're out. So that's very interesting. We oughta. Okay, so you are living in the US, you went to university, you're an American. When and why were you thinking about leaving?
So I honestly, as far back as I remember, I didn't want to live in America. Or let me put it like this. I grew up, so when I was growing up, my parents moved to America because of the war in Liberia, which started in the early 90s in 1990. It actually really started in the 80s. In like 1980 was the first coup d'etat, but then it really got bad in 1990. And so I grew up always hearing about the war, always hearing about what was going on in Liberia, how home had been destroyed. And home in my household, when we said the word home, it was never America, it was always Liberia. So I always attached home to the continent. Like it was always, that's home for me. Even though I'd been when I was a kid once before the war started, but I'd never lived there. I mean, I did not really know. I knew what it was to be Liberian for my family. So I had secondhand, this is what it is to be Liberian. Unlike a lot of other immigrants who may have had opportunities to go back to their country, we didn't because the war stopped that. So I wasn't able to go back to Africa in general. I went to Ghana when I was in college. My last semester, summer before I graduated, I went as on a missions trip, and then I didn't go to Liberia until like 2017. So just to say, I hadn't been on the continent growing up, but I just knew that was home. And so when I graduated from college, I wanted to join the Peace Corps. I wanted to do something that would get me back to the continent. So for me, it was one when it was growing up, the fact that home was always on the continent. Hey, Esty. Sorry, just saw that comment. And so home was always on the continent. My last year of college, I took several classes around African economics. I majored in African studies at Emory. So it was all about going back home and all about economic development on the continent. And I decided in 2010 to apply for the Peace Corps and go and test out my ideas about economic development on the continent. I was ready to go. Like it had always felt like that's where home is.
Y'all are not answering this question at all like I thought you would. That's what I get for forming my opinions ahead of time. That's what I get.
What you looking for?
Well, it's just not what I
We still
expected.
got two of us that
folks
haven't
to
answered.
say.
Okay, so wait till the last two
Okay.
answer, and then see if we've given you
Okay.
the answer.
All right. Go ahead, Dawn.
Okay, so the question is when. Tell me the question again.
Like, when and why did you first start thinking like,
Okay,
I want to live somewhere else?
okay. So for some reason, for me, it was in my 30s or something, was when, I mean, years ago, when I think back, that I was like, I'm not living in the US. I'm not going to die in the United States. Now, mind you, my parents did not go back to Belize often. They didn't visit at all. I have relatives that have never left Belize. I have relatives that left Belize, came to the United States, stayed for 20, 30 years, went back. My parents only went back one time. And for me, I didn't go, my parents didn't take me to Belize. When I went, I was already an adult. So that was when I was able to see Belize really for the first time. But just like Wayada said, it was always home. Like my friends, even though I'm American, they really don't, they know that it's like, you're not American. You're American, but we really don't consider you American, because I really was that immersed in my Belizean culture. So when I went to Belize, I was an adult, I'm married, and I took my son. And when I went there and I saw the lifestyle there, I said to myself, why would they not want to come back here? I understand why some people don't leave here or don't care to stay in the US. I had an aunt, she had the green card. She came after a while. She says, I don't really give a crap about the US. I'm not going to stay there. I don't need to come back and forth. I'm just going to stay in Belize because that's home. And it was at that point when I was like, the lifestyle that was there compared to the lifestyle that was in the US was what made me start to think. And I actually thought that that's where I was going to eventually live. Of course, that didn't happen because I'm in France, but that's what made me start thinking about, I'm not staying in the US for the rest of my life, was when I made that visit and I saw the lifestyle there, the food, it was laid back. It wasn't, it was easy. And that's what made me say, yeah, that's the kind of lifestyle that I want to, I hate to say die in, but that's where I want to live out the latter part of my years. And that's when I first was like, yeah, I'm not staying in the US. I'm not retiring and I'm not staying in the US for the rest of my life. And it wasn't me saying when I'm 65. No, I had no intentions on staying in the US up to that age at all. So that's for me when I first started thinking about, I'm going to live outside the US.
And still, that's not the answer I was expecting to get either. I do, and I'm gonna let Carla go, but I'm noticing both Zoe and Weada were like, no, like never, this was never home. You said that this was never home, which I don't know. I did not expect that. And I don't know if it's because I am American and, the propaganda has been so embedded in my head, this idea that like, even though I will be the first to admit, I never felt at home in America, but it was all I had, I guess. And maybe being connected to other places, even if you didn't visit until you were an adult like Dawn, you always knew there was something else.
Right.
That was all I had.
And that might be the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Until I got to the point that I was like, I don't care if this is all I got. There's got to be something better than this.
Yeah. I think it's also twofold as well. It's like one, not having immediate links to another easy avenue out, but also one of the things that that differs, as much as there are similarities between the UK experience and the US experience to Black folks, the reality is like you guys built America. Like you have like hundreds of years claim to that land. So like, yes, it may be hostile, but it's very different for me to kind of like my great grandfather went to the UK to fight in World War I. Other than that, it's like 100 years and we're out. But if you built a place, if you know that you deserve more, then to leave, it's like, yeah, you could leave, but also you're kind of owed something. So that level of complexity is definitely something that I notice when I'm speaking with African Americans. It does differ. Like your expectations of what America should be is different for perhaps for people who have less claim to the place, perhaps.
That's a very interesting idea. Carla, now, Carla is a special.
You're not
So
going to
I
get the
really
answer you're
no
looking
idea
for.
how you're going to answer this question, because Carla alluded to this in her interaction, but as an adult, Carla has lived in, is it 10 countries?
11.
It might be more than that.
It's 11.
Yeah, 11 countries. So, okay, so when you were back in the US, and then at some point you decided, I think I'm gonna live somewhere else. Why, what was the thought process there?
I'm going to go back to childhood. I think I was always going to live somewhere else. I grew up between the US and Jamaica, so I consider both places home in my soul. And while I was growing up as a young adult, a teenager, I would travel to Canada to visit my aunt because my mother's sister has lived in Canada since I was a child. And so I was literally going between 3 countries consistently as a young adult. And so for me, I always like, okay, I have a passport, I can go places. And so I went to school with the notion that I was going to live abroad or work abroad in some capacity. I wanted to be a lawyer, and my philosophy was boardroom, not courtroom. And I grew up during the time of NAFTA, the North American Trade Agreement. And I was like, I want to go work on NAFTA. So for me, it was like, I was going to go work in Latin America and the Caribbean. That didn't happen, and I worked in the US and got my career started in the US in higher education. But then I was always applying for jobs overseas until I finally got one. And so I took my first job in 2007, and of course I repatriated for a couple of years. But as of now, I'm on my 11th year living abroad. And so for me, I think it was always there. And I teased my mother all the time that I was like, you gave me a passport when I was under 1 year old. I'm sure you expected me to go live somewhere else, right?
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I was going to follow this question up, like with the when and why, because I guess my underlying thesis here, and now I'm really ashamed to admit this, was I expected to hear the stories of like the people before you had like made the sacrifice to go to this other country to have a better life, and here you were turning your back on their sacrifice to go and pursue something else. And what I have heard so far has told me I was completely off base, and I really should be ashamed for making those kinds of presumptions. But I will be the lesson for other people that I think those of us who don't have recent immigrants in our family need to reevaluate and think about how we think about people who immigrate places. As y'all have pointed out, people move to new places for lots of different reasons, whether they be temporary or they're thinking long-term or what have you. And everybody's story is different, and we need to be very careful of those grand generalizations.
I
So
don't
having said that, what'd you say, Zoe?
I don't think your assumptions are wrong. Like there are people in my own family who feel that way about me. And it's in the interviews that I do with other people who've moved to the Caribbean, who've moved back, their family like, well, why didn't you move to Hong Kong or Dubai or Singapore, but to move to the Caribbean? Like, why? Like, it's so backwards, it's so underdeveloped. Like my own grandmother, like a week before I left, I bumped into her in the market. She said, why are you going? Why are you going to the Caribbean? Why don't you just have a nice desk job and stay somewhere where things work? So I think your theory is one that more people subscribe to than folks like us. I think people like us are seen as slightly crazy. So yeah.
But I know better. So that's why I am beating myself up, because I know better than this. But I guess that just goes to show you that even when you do know better, you still mess up. So I am curious though, when you were like, I am leaving, I am going to pursue this life elsewhere. How was that met? What was the response like from relatives, particularly relatives who had moved or who, I don't know, but I am curious about that.
I'll dive in.
Go ahead, Carla.
Yeah.
I'll dive in. So I took a job in the Middle East. This was sitting here now, it's 15 years ago. So think about the Middle East 15 years ago that I took a job. My family was like, you're going where, to do what, and why? My mother was probably more open than anyone else, but I definitely had family members that were like, this is not right. And my mother she knew the Middle East in the sense of Saudi Arabia because the company she worked for did a lot of work with Saudi Arabia in the sense of water. Her company built all this water desalination. So she's like, Saudi Arabia. I'm like, no, Mom, next door. I'm going to the UAE next door. So she's like, okay. So we talked about that. But then I had family members who were like, okay, you're crazy. They didn't really say that, but that was the impression I got. And then, of course, I did other things, like I went and lived in Afghanistan. So then they really thought I was crazy. But I think it was the sense of, I think some of what you just mentioned, Adelia, it's like, okay, so you're moving out. And in my brain, for me, I was like, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I explore? And in my mind, I'm thinking, you moved, I can move. And so while the US is home and it's my home of my birth, I have the opportunity to explore. And so I was going to do that.
Okay.
For me, sorry.
No, go ahead, Dawn.
I don't have neither of my parents, but I think that my dad probably would have been like, okay. My mom probably would have just been like, she probably would have asked more of, why, or, okay, if you are, why are you going to France? Because like I said, I chose not to go to Belize because, not to burst anybody's bubble, but there ain't nothing to do in Belize. And I need more to do than just be a beach bum. Okay. I thought I could be a beach bum, but I'm too young to be a beach bum. So sorry, the island is very small. Like 3/4 of the island I'm probably related to. And I'm like, nah, that's not gonna work for me. But a couple family members that I am in contact with, of course, they do what everybody else does. They ask the questions. My sister, she was happy. It's more of the friends, what I call the friends that are, like family, the friends, they were the ones that were, really like, really? You're, well, here comes the questions. Well, why? For how long? Well, what about your son? Like all the questions. And I think my family knows more than my friends, even the friends that have known me for a long time. don't question me because I'm gonna do what I want to do anyway. So it's like, just be like, okay, all right, you know. So my family, um, I don't think that my family would have had, some people would have probably said something to me, but they don't dare say something to me. And then others wouldn't, because I've had several family members, even, you know, that lived in the US for 30 something odd years, and they packed up and went back to Belize. So, you know, it's kind of like, will you, like, you know, like Carla said, you move and then you move back. So only difference is I'm not coming to Belize, I'm moving to a different country. So my family did not really have much to say. Not that they could, but they really didn't have much to say.
I was gonna say for my family, they were happy, um, because, like I said, my family migrated because of the war. If it wasn't for the war in Liberia, my family would have absolutely been back in Liberia. They didn't want to come to America. It wasn't like America was like the land of opportunity. They came for school. Um, my mom came because her first husband was there. I mean, like he was the president of the UN or something like that. He had a really high up title. Anyway, but most of my family members came for specific reasons, like school or something else, and not because they wanted to be in America. And then the war broke out, and so they couldn't go back home. And so America was a makeshift home. Like, we have to be here. And so, that being said, like, then they have a whole generation of kids that were born in America and grew up in America that they did not want to be born in America or grow up in America. Like, they would have absolutely wanted us to grow up in Liberia. And so I was the first of my generation, to be like really excited about Africa and really wanting to go back home. And so when I was like, I'm moving, I'm gonna join the Peace Corps, and I moved to Guinea. Which is right north of Liberia. They were happy for me. And when I decided to stay and build a company, and really got into, economic development and building businesses and supporting entrepreneurs, they were just really excited that it was almost like bringing the family back to the continent.
Nice.
The response from my family was really mixed. So, like at 19, I was traveling around the world to write articles. I moved to Italy at 24. I moved to Spain at 29. And there was like no conversations, like, oh yeah, Zoe's off again. But moving to Grenada, it was like, what? Why? And that thing, that kind of what you were saying before, that rejection of, like, what seems okay is to move for economic reasons, to get a better job, to have access to better education, better healthcare. Like, that is okay. But to move for a better quality of life, or to find like well-being and stability, that's like, whoa, that's some like crazy hippie business. Like, why are you doing that? That's not safe. Stay here. Like, like the pain's here, but they're contained. And for a long time, I mean, I thought it was just my family, but checking out many of the websites for folks who are looking to move abroad, like, it is that family feedback, that kind of fear that like, oh, you can't leave. And what was funny is that I read Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome way later, after it was maybe just like 3 years ago. And I think there's a lot in how we are conditioned culturally, whether our ancestors were in the US or South America or the Caribbean, to just want us to stay safe. Like, don't escape the plantation, stay safe on the plantation, you get fed on the plantation. And the moment it's like, no, I'm going to break free, like, whoa, that's not safe, stay safe. So that's how I react to it when people are like, very fearful, very questioning. I'm like, cool, that's you doing your thing. That has nothing to do with reality and what is our advantage. So learning to distinguish your fears and someone else's is really important.
Right.
It's interesting because I feel like if Dawn would have been like, I'm gonna relocate to Belize, folks would have been like, okay, yeah, you're going home. Whereas Zoe does go home, and it's kind of like, why are you going there? Like, there's a whole wide world of places you could be going. Why are you going there? So I find that really, really interesting. So the next question is, how or why, or yeah, I guess why do you live in the country that you live in now?
For me, it was spiritual. I hate to say it, but
I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say that about France.
Yeah,
for
me
me,
either. I was thinking the same thing.
for me, it was a spiritual thing. France was not even on my radar. I've always said, okay, when I do travel abroad, I want to go to Italy and Spain. And I mean, like France was not even on my radar. But I happened to come to France through a day layover in like when I was going to Morocco a few years back. And I had to be over there. So I did the hop on, hop off bus. I'm like, okay, France isn't that bad. I think when people when I have people like, oh yeah, and they hype up stuff, for me, it's kind of like it always disappoints. So that's why I think I never thought about France. So then I said, okay, I'll come back at some point in my life. It's not that bad. I'll come back. So for my 50th birthday, I decided to come back because, Adelia, I had a baking company. So part of it was I've always wanted to learn how to make French desserts. So I came over, I was here for a whole week. I wouldn't let anybody come with me because I don't like to travel with people. And I was here, I took my workshops, I did everything. And I swear to God, y'all, I'm not joking. My spirit was just like, bam. And my friends said to me, you look, even in your pictures, you look so different. And I'm telling you, I've never felt that feeling before. That's what it was. And then I was like, I think I would love to live here. Now I was in Paris. People know me, I got to be near water. That's the Caribbean part of me. So my friends were like, they said, have you ever gone to the South? And I was like, no. They were like, you need to go go to the South. A year and a half, actually in the middle of COVID, long story short, I said, you know what? I was remote. I was a lawyer, I was doing courtroom stuff. We went remote. I said, I'm going to see if I can find a pastry school to get certified in the south of France. Found one, took a leave of absence for 6 months, came over, did the course, scouted out all the cities along the French Riviera and the southern coast of France. And I said, I'm doing it. And it was between two cities, Nice and Marseille. And I went back home. I couldn't stay away. 3 months later, came back during my birthday, came to Nice, and I was like, it's Nice. And I went back home and shut the business down, sold stuff, packed up stuff, left, and here I am.
I love your story. Yes, I know, right? Like, yes, sis.
Thank you. Oh, and I got the whole, do you know anybody there? Do you know the language? I'm like, no, and so what? It's
Right.
called meet people, and it's called I'm learning the language. So what big deal? No. But I'm going because it just kept calling me. And what's crazy is my last name, I've always heard in the family, is French. So I don't know, maybe there's some spiritual connection there that's for real. But yeah, that's what did it for me.
There may be. All right, Zoe, you
Yes.
learned Italian, you worked in Milan, you lived in Spain, but yet you moved to Grenada.
Yeah, I mean, for me as a kid, Grenada was always, it was too small, too slow, too hot. It's still hot. This is why I'm like shining. It's still hot. But I think, yeah, I love Europe. Dating European guys, figured that's where I was going to end up. But I think the shift was having kids. The shift was having kids, experiencing what the UK was like 30 years later, realizing not that much had changed in terms of the nonsense that they were dealing with in school, in the playground, etc. Thinking, if I move to Italy, is it going to be any different? No, it's probably going to be worse, same as in Spain. But yeah, that thing of just wanting to raise kids that were in an environment where they were affirmed rather than tolerated was something that was really important to me as a mother. Doesn't mean that every aspect of their existence here is perfect. No. Luckily, they don't even have Grenadian citizenship, so they can travel the world and explore more than an island of 120,000 people. But in terms of what I noticed of my friends who were Grenadian and moved to the UK in their 20s, they were so rooted in who they were, their sense of identity, and like just not any sense of like feeling apologetic about who you are. I mean, I want that for my kids. It's too late for me. Like I'm already like, really grounded in Babylon's ways. But to show my kids that there is another way and what it's like to go to a school where all of your teachers are Black. And I guess for those of you in the US, maybe that's common. Maybe it's no big deal. But for me in the UK,
No, it is not. I was a Black school teacher and I taught high school, and I cannot tell you how many kids I was the first Black teacher they ever had. So no,
yeah,
it is not common.
and it makes such a difference. I remember there was a time, my littlest one, she's 6, and they said something to her like, "Oh, why are you down?" She said, "Oh, I'm not special. No one cares about me," or something like that. She was going through some stuff. And 3 weeks later, they told me about it. But what her 2 beautiful Black female teachers did, they got everyone to do affirmations saying, "I am beautiful, I am strong." And I'm thinking, how cool is that? For it not to be a teacher who like sees that weakness and picks on her, but like more as an entire class, we're going to teach them self-belief. We're going to, as Black women, mirror back to her what it looks like to be strong, what it looks like to just empower each other as a community. And I know for sure that would not have happened in the UK. No chance. So it's little things like that. But I mean, I didn't know that that was going to happen in Grenada. I hope that that would happen. And also just, yeah, I was like old. I didn't party anymore. I didn't go to clubs. I didn't go to restaurants. I didn't go, all the stuff that London had to offer wasn't really fitting for where I was as a single mom with 3 kids. So to be somewhere where my kids can literally leave the house at 3 in the afternoon and come back at 7 in the evening without me having to worry where they are, that would never happen in the UK. In the UK, when we go back and they're by my side in a supermarket queue, their tendency is to wander off because they could do that in Grenada. I'm like, no, guys, this is not Grenada. If you wander off, there's no saying that someone won't take you and no one will ever see you again. So getting them rooted in a sense of freedom has a lot to do with why I chose Grenada and a predominantly Black.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful.
So Wiata, how did you, well, because I'm trying to think. I don't know if I knew you were in Senegal.
Yeah, I
Knew
just
you.
moved to Senegal last year.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've been in Guinea since I moved to Guinea for Peace Corps in 2011. I started a nonprofit there called Dare to Innovate, business incubator, supporting young people to launch businesses. Grew and built that into the biggest incubator in Guinea. Then started an agricultural company called Aqua Farms Africa. We trained and worked with somewhere around 15,000 young people across Guinea, and invested in around 400 companies, startups, small businesses. And in 2020, by the time that the pandemic hit, I was burnt out. I was completely and utterly burnt out. I was working something like 16-hour days, which is insane. I know
I'm
now.
actually surprised it was only 16 hours
It
because
was.
Wiata and I have never met in person. But when we met on the internet, she made me feel like you ain't doing shit. Like, girl, you need to get off your ass and start doing some things because she was doing literally all of the things. So I am not shocked that you were burned out by then.
Yeah, 16. It was more like 16 to 18 hours. Like I wasn't sleeping. I was very, very immersed in everything I was doing. And in 2020, it was like I was burnt out. My body gave up. And all of the borders shut down. I was in Guinea. I was really nervous about leaving. But my body was like, you need to go. Like you need to go home. And so I took the last flight out of Guinea on a Air France flight that was only it was only for citizens, French citizens, but connections. I got a first class ticket for really cheap, and got to Charles de Gaulle airport in France. I slept on the floor for like 4 days before there was a flight to get to the States. It was crazy, but I got home and I spent like 2020 to last year really being at home with my family. I'd been living overseas for so long. Of course I was going home and visiting my family, but I hadn't lived with my family since I was a teenager, since I left for college. And just like gaining my everything back, just my learning that, okay, you can't work yourself to death. Like, you need to have balance, learning a lot about myself, getting my spirit back, like my connection with God, but all of it back. And I didn't realize how much I was, how much I was overworking myself until I came back to the States and was living with my parents. And it was like, wow, I was really working a lot. So yeah, I stayed at home until last year. And then it was like, thankfully, my parents, I love them to death. They took care of me and supported me while I was home. And last year, it was like, what do I want to do? And honestly, like my heart is on the continent. What do I want to do next? I resigned from Dare to Innovate, my organization, still running, but I resigned as director. I built a partnership for my agricultural company, so I have a partner that I'm working with now that manages it. And so, what do you want to do now? And so, I've always loved Senegal. Like, it's right above Guinea, and so Guinea is a hard place to live. It's a very underdeveloped country. It's like, I think it's like 3 from the bottom in the world, like maybe 5 from the bottom. It's very, very difficult. And but I was in love with what I was doing, and which is why I stayed there for so long. But I was always going to Senegal, right? It was like maybe an hour flight from Conakry, Guinea Conakry. So I was always going to Senegal to visit and just hang out. And the vibe here is just, it's very much an island vibe. It's very laid back. It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful place. And I've always just felt really at peace whenever I came here. So when I started looking for jobs, and because I was like, I want to take a break from being an entrepreneur for a while. And so I was looking for jobs, and I came across a tech company in Senegal. When I was looking for jobs, I was like, I'm looking in Dakar. And it really was kind of like, I'll just start looking. And then this company was there, and it's really flexible. I have unlimited paid vacation. I can come home, for 4 months out of the year and spend time with my family. So it just was a really good fit, and gave me the chance to be able to move to Senegal. So here I am now.
Okay. And I just want to take a moment to highlight the fact that she said she wanted to take a break from being an entrepreneur, and she got a job. Like, there is no shame in that.
None. I get that too. No, look, I haven't even started my business yet that I said I was going to do here, because I just want to live right now. I don't want to do it. I just want to live. Right now, let me live. I get it.
Oh my gosh.
I applaud you for doing that and not feeling like you're going backwards, which is what most people, well, you're an entrepreneur, now you're going back to work. Yeah, because I don't have to think about nothing. And then I go there, I come home. I get it. I totally get it.
Dawn, like what you just said, I'm living now. Like for so long, my life has been about everyone else and about building these companies and my staff and offices and that was my life. It was everything. And I am relearning how to be and just live. And my first day when I got here, and I, 9 to 5, like I got home from the office at 4, I think it was even early. And I was just sitting here like, So what do I do?
What do we do now?
Like, what do
Nothing.
what
Netflix,
do I-
nothing.
And it really
Nothing.
was nothing. I can sleep.
I'm
I can read
glad
a book.
that you did that,
Go
that you
take
took
a
a break,
walk.
because you're
Right?
way too young to have
Yeah.
been like doing all of that for all those people and burning yourself out. You're way
Yeah.
too young for that. So I'm proud of you for stepping back.
Thank
I am
you.
proud too of your age, because I'm 53 and I
Wow.
started the cutoff in like late 40s, right before I turned 50. And 50, when I came over here, that was the pivotal point where it was like, okay, it's about me.
Mhm.
The second act of my life is going to be for me. The first act was for everybody else, doing everything what people wanted you were supposed to do, the right thing. Da, 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 da. The second act is selfishly, unapologetically for me, and that's how it should be for you.
You are
Absolutely.
so speaking to me right now.
Yes.
And also, just a second ago, when you said, like, without feeling like you're going backwards, those feelings definitely were there. But I had to learn to get out of them, because for so long, like, my work has been who I am, like, completely attached to my identity. And this period of my life is like, that is not my identity. Who are you, Yada? What are you doing? What do you want to do? Where do you want to be? Who do you want to meet? And it's been really amazing. Yeah.
And it's fine if you don't know.
It's true.
If point you don't know, it's fine for that too. I mean, I've been struggling with that a little bit. It's like I've always known, and now I'm kind of like,
Yep.
I just don't want to do nothing. I just want to
You
live.
gotta
I don't
figured it out. No.
I was born to live. That is that quote?
Yes.
Yes.
I was born to live.
All right. Now, Carla, how or why did you end up in the Dominican Republic?
Oh yeah.
So I need to back up a little bit. So I've been doing my career in higher education, starting with the US, the UAE, back to US, and then going through Afghanistan, the Commonwealth of Dominica, Singapore, and then in Singapore, I took my first career break. And I went and lived between Indonesia and Malaysia, building Rose Apple Global, my company. So becoming an entrepreneur. And then I was like, I need to go back to work. I want to go back to higher ed. I love higher ed. And so I went back to Bangladesh. So I took a job in Bangladesh and worked there in the heart of COVID. And that didn't work out very well. So in the heart of COVID, I packed up and moved to Niger, West Africa, and worked there for a year and fulfilled my contract. And I was like, okay, my contract's done. What am I going to do next? So I had a friend here who said, come. And I was like, okay. So with her urging, I came to the DR. We are neighbors. We live next to each other. And do our own things. She's also an entrepreneur. So that's how I ended up here in the DR. I'm on my second career sabbatical, where I am taking a break from higher ed. Now, I will admit, I am getting a little antsy. I want to be back on a college campus around college students. I love my young people. So I am looking to go back. But that's how I ended up here. And so, like Miata, I have no issues going back and forth between the two. Now, my company continues to run while I'm at an institution like that. I do both.
It is, I want to point out that Carla is on her second sabbatical. You're one of the few that take a sabbatical and then end up going back to work, because so many folks I talked to, it was like the sabbatical was the gateway drug. So I want to point that out, because I think there is some belief that, like, if you are lucky enough to take a sabbatical, you get to do that one time in your life. And what I think the ladies have pointed out is there are no rules. You do what it is that you want to do, when you want to do it, how you want to do it. It, like, throw the rule book out the window, because it really does not apply.
And that's the US rule book. See, that's the whole thing. We have been conditioned to think the United States, you go to school, you go to college, you get married, you have 2 children, a dog, a white damn picket fence, and you work your ass to death, and then you start to live at 65. Who the hell made them rules up? And those are some dumbass rules.
The
Sorry.
folks who need your labor. That's who made
Okay.
those rules
So
up.
no, let me tell you, if I could find me a part-time job on Air France right now so I can have flight benefits, I'm gonna be working on Air France with flight benefits. Throw it out because those rules suck. It's the reason why so many Americans are stressed out, depressed, have anxiety. You working for things, or you're working for a future that, if COVID should have shown anybody anything, is not promised. And you don't even live with all the hard hustle. I don't want to hustle anymore. If I do
You
anything, I
don't
want to do
live.
it. I want to do it. I don't want that hustle and grind anymore. So, like Adelia said, there's no rules. You make the rules now. It's your rules. And I think that's the opening that a lot of people, when they see folks like us, or they're now discovering, is they're realizing that you have to untrain, unprogram your mind, because we have all been living by the definitions given to us by the US. What their definition of success is. Success is you make 6 figures and you have this title and da 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 da. But success could be, for me, what it is right now. I get up and I walk 3 hours along that damn beach every day and sit there and thank God that I am here and He brought me here. That's success for me, and I'm not stressed. So we have to really unprogram and our own definitions. We have to define those things for yourself.
100%. And I think shifting environment makes such a big difference.
Yes.
So you find in Senegal, if the expectation is to chill, it's easier to chill without feeling guilty about it. I remember my first 6 months in Grenada, damn slow. Like, I want it now, I want this, I want that. And like, if you wanted that, you should have stayed where you were. You're in a different environment where there's a totally different vibe, and the opportunity really is to learn how to surrender to it, which isn't easy. Like, that deprogramming doesn't always feel nice. When you have expectations that you feel are the default, learning that you have to let go of them can be challenging. But what you get on the other side, that peace, that lack of stress, is so different. So
Zoe, I'm wondering about the experience that your kids are having. You weren't, like, you were the grandchild of immigrants. I'm struggling with the right words for this question, because I was wondering if their experience was anything similar to yours. Like, you grew up knowing, like, yes, you were born in the UK, but there was somewhere else. There were other things. Like, you talked a little bit about how you were treated, or, the interactions with people at school. Is their experience any way similar or any way different than what yours was?
yeah, their experience is different. Like, so my kids don't love being in Grenada. If you ask them, do you enjoy it? Like, anytime we meet a tourist on the beach, like, oh, you moved from the UK, that's so great. And like, no, it's terrible. My mum took us here against our will. And like, yeah, they're very like anti-Grenada, if anyone asks them. But on the flip side, the life that they have here, they wouldn't have in the UK. Like, they don't have friends with swimming pools. They don't get to go on yachts. And we don't roll like that in the UK. It's very, very different. Whereas here, everyone's outdoors. Lots of people sail. Like, my son has sailing lessons twice a week. In the UK, I can afford that. So yeah, their relationship with the UK, with Grenada, is that, yeah, they're anti-Grenada because they're young kids, so they miss a lot of the, like, Amazon Prime, like tons of cinema, like the kind of consumerism stuff, which, like, there's aspects of it that I miss. For them, it's massive.
Okay.
So they're slowly learning to adapt into the kind of freer side of Grenada. And for the younger ones, it's easier. For my son, who's turning 13, I'm honest that it's challenging. I think there are some destinations that work really well for young kids that aren't yet that programmed. But if you like a teenager who's very much like conditioned to buy, wear, eat this, there are destinations that can be challenging.
And that's already challenging in and of itself, that age.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't get to distinguish how much is vacation and how much is my child just being like whatever it is. But yeah, it's not always it looks great on Instagram, but the reality of moving as a family can be complex. But I'm hoping I'm sowing the seeds maybe 20 years down the line and be like, oh yeah, I'm a balanced person because I know where I come from and I can connect to nature. Or I might just have really high therapy bills. I don't know which, but it's worth the gamble. It's worth the gamble.
Okay. Now, if y'all have got questions, I see some of y'all have dropped your questions in the chat. Go ahead and do that. I have one more question, but I'm going to save that one. Stephanie wants to know, can y'all tell us what parts of your lives are easier now and which parts are harder?
Ooh, that's a good question, Stephanie.
I
Figure
would-
Stephanie would throw a question to make us
Right. So for me, I would say that but living in West Africa, it's a lot less expensive, and so I'm able to save more money. I'm able to invest more. I'm able to pay down debt. I'm able to buy land. All of those things are things that I don't think I would be able to do as easily if I was still in the States. Actually, I don't even think it's not even I think I don't believe I would be able to. So those are things that are a lot easier. It's also a lot easier to travel from here because the tickets are so much cheaper. So like I was talking to Don and Carla that I just came back from Barcelona. I went to France. I hop to Europe all the time. I go to other African countries. I've been all over West Africa. So like those flights from the States are like, thousands of dollars, whereas from here it's like, 400 or less, maybe, if that. And so it's a lot easier to travel to other places. So those are things I think that are easier. Also like meeting people from a lot of different places, because as an expat, there's the community of expats here is from everywhere. So I have friends from literally around the world. I've learned, I speak French now. So easier to learn another language when you're immersed in it. All of those things are easier. Harder, I would say, is access to things like Zoe was talking about different, like you don't have Amazon Prime where you could just like order something off the bat and get it like the next day. So having access to things I want to purchase, if I want to start something new that requires a specific item or a specific product, like I have to finagle a lot to try and figure out how I'm going to get that product because it's not available locally. So things like that are harder. Let's see, what else could be harder? I think, this is something. So in America, because I grew up in America, I can turn myself off and go on autopilot. Like you can walk into any Walmart, everything's the same. You walk into any gas station, the candy is over here, the chips over here, the drinks are in the back. In another country, you're like, you almost have to always be on because it's not exactly you can't just go on autopilot. So I would say that like sometimes you can get cultural fatigue, which is like the fatigue of just being on all the time and having to, just be aware of things. Whereas in America, I can literally almost not even know that I just went to Walmart. Like, I just went to Walmart and I bought this, like not even really be conscious during my day. So I think that's also something that's harder. Yeah, but not so hard that I would move back.
I love that. I think
Let's put that caveat in there.
Right?
Just put all.
Yeah, just throw that in there.
Cultural fatigue is real. I'm feeling a little cultural fatigue at the moment, if I'm honest. And things that are harder, like it's the simple things. Like I want to do a video on trying to find an ATM, right? Because like a lot of the places here don't take cards. Not a lot. Some places don't take cards. and I have no cash. You go to this ATM's not working. You drive like another 10 minutes. That one's not working. Like, it's little things like that that aren't significant. It's not enough to make you go back home, but at times it's like, this island,
Right.
why does it not work the way that I want? Dealing with bureaucracy, that is very different. Like in the UK, everything is done online. Like, why do I have to go into a building to get a piece of paper or to get a stamp? Like, it's everything requires like actual stamps. So things like that can be annoying. But in a way, it goes back into what's easier. Is that I find it's easier to be myself in Grenada. And that isn't necessarily the self that I thought I was, but I'm kind of becoming. Like, in some ways, Grenada peels off layers and it poses you with questions that you have to answer. And because there are less distractions here, the more time you spend, whether it's in nature, in the sea, with people, like, you're constantly kind of refining yourself. And it's not always easy. Like, my instinctive reaction to be like, damn this island, but I can't find an ATM. Like, it's also, okay, did you really need it? Or can you just take a chill pill? You know, like, it definitely, there are things here that are challenging, but they're challenging for the greater good. The stuff in the UK that was challenging was just negative stuff, like toxic stuff. So that's how I describe the difference between the two places.
Go ahead, Carla.
Okay. I would say for me, the things that became easier when I moved abroad, career progression. I moved abroad for my career. That was my purpose when I took a job. And so I have traversed my career in ways that I don't think I would have if I had stayed stateside. So for me, that's been the biggest thing, is opportunities to be and work at 6 different universities of different kinds, both and work with such vast amount of students, both national, locals, and international students. So the career is number one. Community. I do think, building community is so much easier. You meet and people are just welcoming in a lot of ways. I think it's so much easier than I think I experienced stateside. I love to cook. So going to the markets and the fresh fruits and vegetables, and you also have to be conscientious because to get the best things you have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. But you come home with this plethora of fresh fruits and vegetables, and being able to eat differently and healthier, and all of that, I think it's been easier. So the 6 o'clock in the morning may be a challenging thing to get up, because you really want to sleep in on a Saturday morning. But what do you prefer? I think the bureaucracy, I think Zoe said that, can be a bit challenging. And in my case, because I've lived in some vastly different countries that have patriarchy and religious differences, the bureaucracy and navigating that as a woman has been uniquely different and challenging. But again, I wouldn't give that up. It's what's enriched who I am. I would say the financial aspect as well, the cost of living, the ability to travel, which someone already had mentioned. I think the ability to pamper yourself when you choose is another one that I have found to be an easy. The challenges, I really don't. I try not to think about them. Yeah, it's frustrating to go to have the ATM. It's frustrating to, in the US, we're used to refunds. Here's a good one. But when you're abroad, there's no such thing as a refund. you buy it, you buy it.
No, and that changes your whole approach to shopping.
It does. And if you buy something that's damaged and you didn't know that it's damaged, there's no exchanges, there's no refund.
Just yours now. It's now yours.
Exactly.
It belongs to you.
It belongs to you.
So, do you get frustrated about those little things? Yes, but you change your perspective. So I would say those are the things for me.
For me, Oh, and I just saw Sierra Photography. I'm from Belize too. We probably got some relatives, same relatives. That's how small Belize is. For me, it's been easy to breathe. Just being able to breathe and not have, not that I'm an anxious person, but being back in the US, everything that's going on and all the stuff and the headlines, and it's easier for me to disconnect from all that stuff here, and just breathe and just really take it in. Um, it's been easy for me to actually build a community here also. And be honest, as much as I um, don't really care for Facebook, the Facebook groups are fantastic when it comes to the expat community. And I tell people that all the time, that really helps. So that's been easy. It's been easy for me. Like I said, I have a core group of friends already. And actually, believe it or not, when I got here, it was just me and one other African American woman, but it's two now, it's three now. So it's going to be like a group, like five of us. And usually you'll find them more in Paris than here, but they're coming here too. So it's been easy to come here, and it's been easy for me. Now it is harder to, here in France specifically, it's harder to um, to break in with French people because they're very closed off unless you're brought in by somebody, and then they got to kind of feel you out. But once you're in, you're in. The bureaucracy here too sucks, but not nothing that's going to make me run back home. The government where their websites aren't as efficient, and that's the thing that annoys me a little bit. Their technology is not as efficient, and coming here and you send an email to somebody, if you think you're getting the response that day, the next day, the next couple days, you're gonna be stressed out and pissed off all the time because it may be a week or two. I just got a new refrigerator in my apartment, and this is like 3 months running. But it's those little things, but not to the extent. And because I have the baking business, so for me, I've had to reconfigure some ingredients and recipes because the food and the stuff over here is absolutely different. So those little things, but nothing that would make me say, "Damn it, I want to go back home," or I should not have done it. And the travel, for sure, absolutely. That is without a doubt like one of the biggest pluses to being over here. I just came back from Thailand last week. So it's, yeah. And I never thought I would go to Thailand. So yeah.
I was also going to chime in with what Carla said about it being about eating. It's so much easier to eat healthy.
Yes.
Like everything in America has high fructose corn syrup. Like I feel like I fly to America and I breathe and I start to gain weight. Like it's just in everything we eat there. And it's so much like I've gotten so used to eating more natural foods that when I go to the States, it's really, I can't eat fast food anymore. Not because I don't crave it, but because it makes me sick. Like I can't eat a lot of things anymore. So that's also something that's really, that is a plus. Yeah.
Yeah. The market thing is definitely a plus. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm hearing is even the hard parts aren't so bad that it would make you not do what you're doing. And also everybody talking about like bureaucracy and things being inefficient. Y'all, and this is not for y'all, you ladies, this is for the folks that are watching who might be contemplating a move. This is one of the trade-offs. If you're going to live in a place where everybody's chill, where time has very loose meanings, that means that applies also when you're trying to handle business.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are somebody who that is absolutely going to drive you crazy, you've got to really think long and hard about choosing the right destination for you. Okay, I have taken way more of your Friday than I intended to. And so my last question is kind of related to F Doctor's question. Now, let me back up a little bit. The thumbnail for this conversation said first generation turned expat. Um, I have some feelings about using that term expat. I would have preferred to use immigrant. However, immigrant is a very long word to fit on a thumbnail with pictures of four people and all of that. So, my first question, and this kind of connects to F Doctor's question, is how do you see yourself? How do you refer to yourself? Do you see yourself as an expat in this particular country, or do you see yourself as an immigrant?
I'll answer
I
that
see
one.
myself as a. Oh, sorry.
No, go.
Well,
I was
I was
just
just
saying I
going to
see
say,
myself as an expat. Just because I don't know if I feel like immigration is like I'm here to stay. It feels more like this is now my new country, whereas I don't know how long I'll be here, right? I may move somewhere else. So I feel like I'm an expat, but I don't necessarily see myself as an immigrant.
Well, if we're going to be
I,
technical with the definition, then I would be an immigrant because I'm
Mm.
staying here permanently. But I think immigrant has always had this negative connotation, which is why the term expat is kind of being interchanged nowadays with immigrant. I've seen the discussions. I really don't care. People can call me expat, immigrant. I really don't care. I'm here and I'm going to stay here. But I know that the technical semantic would be that I would be an immigrant. But like I said, even though way back in the day, even going on now, even here, I think that if French people were to say, look at me and look at the immigrants, which are more of the African and the Arab people here, they would probably say, oh, no, they're immigrants, but you're an expat. I think that that's where that term is kind of meshing and it's classist. That's what I think it is. But if technically the term immigrant is that I'm here to stay, then I guess I'm an immigrant because I'm here to stay.
Yeah, me, I see the discussion going on a lot, and everyone comes to it from a different perspective. I think I claim immigrant for two reasons. Like one, as a child of immigrants, I kind of feel like I want to stand in solidarity with immigrants. I think, as was said before, like there's definitely a lot laden to the term, like desirable expat, undesirable immigrant, and I don't really want to play into that sort of conversation. um, I've asked people about it before, and it's sort of like, okay, expats bring something to a country, immigrants take something away. I don't believe that either. And I just think I forgot what my second point was. It doesn't matter that much, but to me personally, in Grenada, I come under the category of foreigner. So even though ancestrally there's hundreds, thousands of people in my lineage who were born here, my accent means that I'm not. It's just different. It's different. So yeah, I wouldn't say I definitely wouldn't call myself an expat in Grenada. I can try and call myself a Grenadian. Grenadians will be like, no, you're not. So foreigner is what I live with, and learning to live with that as someone who is of Grenadian descent, it is challenging at times because part of me really wants to belong. I want to feel like held, and in some ways I am. But at other times, I have conversations with people about things that are just really fundamentals to their sense of identity and being, and I just don't get it because I wasn't brought up with that. So I have to accept that kind of like fluid on the border identity. But yeah, I don't like to play into the kind of classist aspects of the term. When I lived in Italy, people would assume all sorts of things. That I was from Senegal, that I was from Ghana, that I was a prostitute and everything, because like they just see black female, okay, you're one of them. Then I speak to them in perfect Italian, like, oh, you're like, and I don't like that. It's just because it works out well for me doesn't mean that I can't be in solidarity with the people who are treated accordingly. That's definitely something that I felt from living in Italy. That the Ghanaian women, the Nigerian women who were trafficked, like they were treated really badly. And I didn't want to kind of be othering as well, if that makes sense. Anyway, it's a complicated thing. Maybe it's not that serious, but to me, it matters.
I just use the term foreigner.
I would say.
Go ahead, Carla.
Okay. It's interesting. I tend to use all three terminologies, depending on where I am and who I'm with. I tend to call myself expat mostly because I am literally in most places that I've been. It's been for career purposes. It's been for employment purposes. I am being hired in by the university that is there to come in. So I do feel myself, I fall into this category as a foreign worker or an expat, and fall into those categories. Being parents of immigrants, I will consider myself an immigrant when I actually decide to permanently settle down somewhere and take on that country as my permanency. And I think I tend to use the word expat because I've not permanency myself anywhere. I've been on this global trek within my career. And so that's how I tend to define myself. So I use all three, but I tend to lean more to expat or foreigner just because of the career aspect of why I am out on the global streets or moving about on the globe.
I was gonna say, sorry, there's another term that like a lot of in West Africa, a lot of like immigrants, children who are moving back to like coming back to the continent to rebuild the continent, to give their skill set to the continent is repats. So we call ourselves also repats sometimes.
And I was going to ask if you considered yourself to fit into that category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I do feel that.
Okay. In every country, in Mexico, I consider myself to be an immigrant. Because I came here with the intention on staying here. Every other country I've lived in, I don't know. I will say the word expat just to expedite things, but that is probably not my preferred term. I use foreigner a lot because I think I feel like it. I don't think foreigner is classist. I could be wrong, but I don't feel like it. I don't care. It doesn't matter where you're from. You're not from here, so you're a foreigner, just like I'm a foreigner, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
So I don't know. All right. Well, go ahead.
No, I agree with you with the term foreigner. What I've found is that going in with the expat immigrant thing is I don't really try to make things racial, but white folks
absolutely.
White folks will say I'm an expat. They're not going to say I'm an immigrant.
Mm-hmm. No, that's for brown and black folks.
Uh-huh.
When I worked in Kuwait, we were at some immigration office, and me and another social studies teacher who also happened to be black, we clocked how depending on the color of your passport, you got sent to certain lines and all that. And I was like, look at us in here with all of us economic immigrants. And there were people from the US who were not people of color who heard me call them economic immigrants and got their feelings hurt. Mm-hmm. And I was like, but isn't that why you're here? Right. For this job and this money they're paying you? So yeah, you're right, F Doctor. There is a lot of stuff connected to those words. And yeah. So I have kept you ladies here much longer than I intended to. Carla, was that you?
I was just going to chime in. And I think one of the things that I don't think we've touched on is that this is generational. This is decades. I mean, we go back to the Josephine Bakers, the Alex Baldwins, and the two more popular names. But this is not a new thing within our diaspora. And I think that's what people are failing to understand. the economic status or the immigrant status or the expat status. These are all foreigner status. We've been doing this for generations. I tell people I'm a generational expat. While my mother may have moved to the United States and stayed there, but I had family members who went and helped build the Panama Canal or went to Cuba, or my family that went to Canada. We have to understand that this is not new. And when it's not new, we can use whatever term we want to describe it, but it's not new to us. And we've just not always classified it in what I would call the higher society, to use that word in loose quotes, terminology of expat. But we've been expats for generations. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Well, yes, people have always moved to different places for, push factors, pull factors, all of that. And it's really only been about 100 years that any country has had like immigration policies. Before that, it was if you wanted to go, you went. And it wasn't, I think, the Chinese Exclusion Act, or there might have been one right before that, but it's still, we're talking about early, like 19 teens, 1920s, before there was even this concept of like, oh, you want to go to that other country? We've got to make you go through this process. There's got to be all this. For the entire history of people, folks have gone where they needed to go to live the life that they wanted to. Which I think is a good place for us to end. I've kept you ladies much longer than I intended. I really appreciate you taking time out of your Friday to come on this channel and share your experience. I know the audience has enjoyed it. I have enjoyed it. Thank you so much. If you want to connect with the ladies, I've got links in the description where you can find them online. F Doctor always says the nicest things. This was not just a discussion, it was an experience. And again, I thought that this would be a good conversation to have, and it's not one I've seen yet in this space. So again, thank you, ladies, for saying yes when I hit you up. I appreciate
Thank you for asking.
You are most welcome, Adelia. Thank you for asking.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Message
all.
me anytime.
Beautifully meeting each one of you.
Right. Bye, everybody.